Thanks, Nadia. And if you wonder where in Scotland it was in a tiny place that none of you would know, but it was fondly referred to as Alloa Nil, which went to the skills of the local football team. So, first, I do respect the land on which we stand and the elders who've looked after this land in the past and currently and will do so in the future, without which we wouldn't be standing and living in such a wonderful place. And I do that not just because it is respectful to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, but it also reminds us that connectedness to school, connectedness to community, and connectedness to culture are important preventives in terms of mental health and alcohol and drug problems. So I make that acknowledgement in that sense, not just in relation to respect. I also want to dedicate this to the young people who might have been injured in a car crash because somebody who drank too much drove their car into them. I want to dedicate this to the people who go out for a night out on a Friday night and end up in hospital or dead because of somebody who was intoxicated hitting them. I dedicate this to the people whose families are disrupted by alcohol. And I think it's important to do that because often we get enmeshed in the data, which is critically important, but we forget the individual faces, the individual lives, and the whole community who are affected by alcohol, and I'll come back to that point in a minute. Now, some of you will realize the limited repertoire I have if you've seen me before, because I always start off my presentation with this quote, but because I work in this area, a lot of people say, on the rare occasions when my wife and I are invited out to drink, they say, go out for a meal rather, they say, does he drink, on the assumption that they're going to have to get the orange juice and the water out, sugar-free orange juice. And so I like to clear up my views about alcohol at the beginning because it's important, my personal perspective. But rather than use my own words, I'm going to use the words of a politician because, as we know, politicians are usually unambiguous and straight to the point and don't compromise. And I'm glad the minister's not in here. And this particular American senator, when he was asked about what used to be my national drink, whiskey, he summed up pretty well what I think. He said, well, if when you say whiskey you mean the poison scourge, the bloody monster that defiles innocence, yea, literally takes the bread from the mouths of little children. If you mean the evil drink that topples a Christian man and woman from the pinnacles of righteous, gracious living into the bottomless pit of degradation and despair and helplessness and hopelessness, then I am in favor of it. I am against it. Whoops. Well, if he was Donald Trump, that's what he'd have said. But if when you say whiskey you mean the oil of conversation, the philosophic wine, the stuff that is consumed when good fellows get together, that puts a song in their hearts and laughter in their lips and the warm glow of contentment in their eyes, if you mean Christmas cheer, if you mean the drink that puts a spring in the old gentleman's step on a frosty morning, a drink that enables a man to magnify his joy and his happiness and to forget, if only for a little while, life's great tragedies and heartbreaks and sorrows. If you mean that drink, the sale of which pours into our treasuries untold millions of dollars, which are used to provide tender care for our crippled, aged and infirm and to build highways, schools and hospitals, then I am in favour at this time. I will not compromise. I will not retreat from this. And he sums up really well the challenge that we have with a drug such as alcohol. That there are those who see the harms and there are those who enjoy the conviviality, and it seems that one gets pitted against the other. So my job is to talk about alcohol and alcohol problems and talk a little bit about some of the evidence, and then others will talk in more detail about this. But the ways in which we conceptualize alcohol affects how we respond to alcohol. So a little exercise, imagine putting your hand up. Don't put your hand up, remember you're on television. I'm going to ask you to imagine whether you'd put your hand up to this. Now I do caution this because once I was in a small village and the local GP put his hand up. And I would ask you to think how you would answer the question if I said, do you abuse alcohol? And I think very few people would even consider putting their hands up. But if I said to you, don't put your hands up, if I said to you, how many of you at some point in your life have maybe driven your car when you shouldn't have? How many of you have been late for work or performed not as well as you should have at work because of the drinking the night before? Argued with your partner, argued with your parents, told a joke you later regretted. And the one that seems to get the biggest response, or ended up in a relationship you might not otherwise have ended up in. And when you say that, you can see people saying, yeah, I've done that, that's happened to me. And unfortunately, we define alcohol and adverse consequences of drinking as being something that happens to those people, heavy drinkers, which means somebody who drinks more than me, people who abuse alcohol. Well, the only way to abuse alcohol is to wash your car with it. It was meant to be drunk. And yet the language we use creates an image that it's about a few people who we should be concerned about, and it's about individual responsibility, and yet we should support treatment. And it's not about what all of us in the community might do, that all of us who drink at some point may have some adverse outcome from drinking. It might be once, it might be one or two times, but as a sum total, that has impact on the whole community. And just to give an illustration for that, if we targeted our responses to drink driving to people who are alcohol dependent, we wouldn't get most of the people who are actually getting into trouble with drink driving, causing havoc for themselves and other people. So how we conceptualize and how we approach alcohol problems is critically important. Anthony Thorley, who is sometimes bemused by the impact his model has had, designed a very simple model of alcohol problems that helps us think, because there isn't an alcohol problem, there's a whole range. There are problems to do with drunkenness. And if you asked a lot of people what concerned them about alcohol, it's actually these problems: drink driving, violence, being woken up at night, not feeling safe down in Northbridge, all of these sorts of things. Anyone who drinks can have problems with intoxication. I may never have consumed alcohol before, and tonight I go out and have 12 beers, and any number of severe consequences could happen to me or someone else. I'm not alcohol dependent, I'm not an alcoholic, I'm not a regular heavy drinker, just because of that drinking on that occasion. And there are also problems to do with the drip, drip, drip of alcohol. I have a couple of beers on my way home from work, after 5 minutes quality time with my children, if they're on a good day. I might have a drink before dinner, and I might have a glass of wine with dinner. I might have a nip of whiskey before I go to bed if my name was Mike Daub and I've got the money to pay for the best whiskey. Everybody else is having a go at him, so I might as well. And so I might not ever become intoxicated and experience problems of intoxication, but if I drink in that way, a number of severe consequences could arise in relation to health, maybe my economic circumstances. So there are people who might have problems in both areas, but to give illustration, it has changed a little bit, but in my original country, if you compared the Scots to the English, let's say they both drank 21 beers in a week, the Englishman would drink, or the Englishwoman would drink 3 beers on Monday and 3 beers on Tuesday and 3 beers on Wednesday, whereas the Scot would drink the 21 beers on Friday night. So you don't see livers rotting quietly away in Surrey, but you see the drunken Scots running down the street at you on Sauchiehall Street. Or the other issue, we're all told that we should drink in the sophisticated way that the French do, often by the French. And we've heard this myth recently that if we drank like the Southern Europeans, well, if we drank like the Southern Europeans, we'd probably have 2 to 3 or 4 times the rate of alcoholic cirrhosis. Drunkenness is frowned upon. They called it the Anglo-Celtic disease because they would. But it does occur. Just because you might not have observed it when you went to a tourist area, and I've seen evidence from government officials in Spain that their rates of alcohol intoxication problems, heavy episodic drinking amongst young people mirrors what's happening in Australia. They still call it the Anglo-Celtic disease. So, first point. Different patterns of alcohol use result in different sorts of harms. And having small bars doesn't make us all speak French. And if we have more and more outlets and more consumption like France, we'll end up with similar levels of alcohol-related harm. And if you want evidence of that, look at what's happened in the United Kingdom when they liberalised the laws to emulate what was happening in the mainland Europe. So, key point, if you forget everything else, you can drink. Oh, I've got a pointer, haven't I? You can drink like the French and kill yourself, or you can drink like the Scots and kill your neighbours. And then there are problems to do with dependence. Now, if you talk to a lot of people about alcohol If you talk to a lot of people about alcohol problems, they think we're talking about those people in the middle. They're people with alcohol dependence, who've got problems of intoxication. They're the sort of people you find in alcohol treatment services. But they are not the only people who experience harm. Now, if we work on the basis that that is what we're going to focus on, then we're not going to get effective responses. Alcohol problems resonate for all of us, whether we drink or not. So I need to get moving on. So the rationale for controlling availability is that alcohol is a commodity with the potential for harm. I would go so far as to say, if you were a free marketeer, the only rationale for liquor licensing laws is the social and health impacts. We don't regulate other products in that way. We have that regulation primarily because of the social and health impacts on alcohol. And without that, why do we have liquor licensing legislation at all? And the other point is, even if you really do believe that individual responsibility is the issue, and it'd be great if it was, I've not seen it demonstrated that it makes a particular difference to the harm that people experience, it's not just the drinkers who are affected. I remember in a debate in a very large room, a mayor was with me debating, and I said I would bring back the hours of sale in Northbridge. And she says, oh, people like you, Steve, want to affect the enjoyment of the majority of people because of the behaviour of a few. And I think there were about 3,000 people in the room. And I said, how many people here are in Northbridge at 3 in the morning? Not one of them. But every single one of them is paying for that through the impact on our emergency departments, the impact on our policing, the impact on our car insurance, the impact on the safety of our children when they go out there, and the impact on our enjoyment when we go out there. So we need to reverse the argument that this is something that resonates for all of us. It's not just a few odd or sick or bad people. The challenge for us is that the responses can be messy. There's lots of different departments and interests. So there's lots of government departments. What the Australian government decides resonates at the local government level. We've got vested interests, and there's nothing wrong with them having vested interests. I don't have a problem with that, and it's the same as for me, as Jane said this morning. I don't get invited to sit on your boards. Don't feel that you should be sat at the table with public health expertise talking about public health. Let's not pretend that you are public health experts. You are not. You are experts in the marketing of, and you're responsible to, your shareholders. So your interests do not coincide in the main with the interests of public health. So we need to work through that. And then there are decisions about what strategies people embrace are often influenced by politics, ideology, and the perceptions that people have about alcohol and alcohol-related problems. So the evidence is consistent. It's a bit like what do you do about getting a good investment in a house? Location, location, location. Well, it's the same answer. Availability, availability, availability. Simple as that. And price, tax, the evidence is consistent internationally, nationally, over time, that price makes a difference. And then we hear arguments, oh, it won't affect young people. Well, young people are responsive to price. It won't affect heavy drinkers. Heavy drinkers are responsive to price. Sometimes they're more responsive because they're spending so much of their money on it. Price makes a difference. We also know that physical availability makes a difference. The hours of sale, the number of outlets, how many days those outlets are open, the nature of the product being sold. And I'll talk about, for example, controls on bulk packaged liquor later on. And we know that even small changes in price can make a difference. So work that Tanya was headed looking at a 5-cent increase in the price of a standard drink made a difference to the number of harms that existed in the Northern Territory. So small changes make huge public health impacts. And that's important for us to get across, because I know when I talk about price, people glaze over and think he's going to charge me $42 for my pint of Guinness. It's not. Even small changes make a difference. The drinking context makes a difference too. We'll all know bars, and we'd say, I wouldn't go there, at this bar or this nightclub or this hotel. So there's a difference in how they're managed, where they're located, what the reputation is, and how they're run. But it's not about just training people, because the evidence says training people doesn't make a difference. It's holding people accountable to the training. So it's about enforcement. And it's also about things like drink driving. And Australia has done an exceptional job in relation to reducing problems related to drink driving. Decreases in deaths of young people related to alcohol are in substantial part, I think, to do with drink driving legislation. We haven't won that, but we've made a significant impact. We know that alcohol promotions are relevant. We keep getting told by the industry it doesn't make any difference. Well, why would you do it? But the main issue is that often those studies are on the whole population, but when you segment the population, which is what advertisers do, young people are particularly sensitive to the impact of alcohol promotions. So telling a 45-year-old who's been drinking VB all their life that Chardonnay is really nice might not have impact. But 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, more likely to have positive views about alcohol, more likely to have intentions to drink, and some evidence that they're more likely to drink and drink heavily. And we shouldn't have young people exposed to alcohol promotions. There's agreement in the community. The government agrees on it, except, I'm talking about the federal government now, the government agrees on it, except when there's a sport on the television. Except when you go to Woolies, as some of us heard the other day, and buy some groceries, and on the back of it there are alcohol promotions. Except when you get promotions pushed through to you on your iPhone, or your Galaxy if you've got one of those. So young people shouldn't be exposed to alcohol promotions because it has a negative impact on them and the broader community. And the evidence in the alcohol area about education and persuasion is limited, but that's because, with the exception of drink driving, we haven't had enduring, well-resourced community information that's linked to policy and other actions. And that's why I think, to a large extent, if you ask the community what they support the things that don't work, and if you ask them about what they don't support, it's the things that do work. And I think if we want to do something in terms of education persuasion, helping people become informed. And there is evidence about the impact of early intervention and treatment, but unfortunately, there's not a lot of uptake about that. For example, there are some excellent pharmacotherapies that are available, but they're hardly ever used amongst our medical practitioners. So we need to do better in that domain. And there are strategies in relation to harm reduction, glass control, school leavers, thiamine, fortified flour. But at the end of the day, location, 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 availability, availability, availability. Does it make a difference? Well, let's just pick violence. A lot of you are familiar with the Newcastle study, but a well-controlled study where they closed a couple of hours earlier than they used to close. 3 in the morning isn't prohibitive. They closed at 3 in the morning. And they compared it to somewhere very nearby. And what they found, there were other aspects, but I think the evidence suggests it was actually the reduced availability after 3 a.m. And we saw a 37% reduction in alcohol-related, in violence in that area, where there's no change in a place just up the road, and there was no displacement, therefore, no evidence of displacement. And those impacts endure, and there are similar impacts in other countries. Small changes can reduce violence in our community now, and arguing about is it personal responsibility or not when there's no evidence that that makes the difference, that a difference like this. And it's not prohibitive. If we look at Halls Creek and Fitzroy Crossing, where there were reductions in the availability of alcohol packaged liquor, and we saw massive changes that endured PR1 and PR2 at 2 time periods after. These halving of police activity in relation to alcohol, assaults reduced by an enormous amount, drink driving fell, and there was also an increase, if I recollect correctly, there was an increase in the number of people who started applying to get licenses because they'd got their lives back together. There was a massive reduction in ED admissions. If we want to save money in our emergency departments, let's reduce the alcohol carnage that we see. And the sobering up shelter, it wasn't needed anymore, and the resources were invested into outpatient care in the communities. Point to make there, an intervention led by Aboriginal leaders in that community had benefit across the whole community, and the evidence tells us it endured. Should you be doing other things? Yeah, sure, you must. You must improve recreational opportunities, you must improve employment opportunities, but you don't get a look-in if a society is awash with alcohol. So it's a drug that has adverse consequences. That's why we should treat it with more respect, not just for the drinker, but for all of us here. Your car insurance is affected by how many people are drink driving. So even at that level. And so it's about balancing public health and personal enjoyment, and the strongest evidence and the most consistent evidence is about availability. And that isn't about being prohibitive, it's about balance. And I've already touched that point. So what do we need to do next? Well, we do need, and other people, I'm going to go through these quickly because others on the panel will touch on these. We need quality current data that actually tell us what's going on. And sales data, for which there's often resistance, is by far the best source of data that you can have. How much alcohol is being sold in what community, and correlate that with the harm in that community, and you have evidence-informed liquor licensing. Not having people come in and say, oh, I think this and I think that, and there's no evidence that it's going to make a difference, and there is. We also need to assess, obviously, the adverse impacts. We need to look at the issue of availability, and there's a national issue of taxation policy, where we have sensible policy that affects alcohol price, and that's going to take a while, but I think we keep at that. But in the meantime, there's a real opportunity to introduce minimum floor pricing, and we've heard that that's an interest in this state. And some of the greatest harm comes from the cheapest alcohol. And we've just seen the Northern Territory go down this path. And if you had $1 or $1.50 as a minimum price for a standard drink, that will make no difference. If you go and have a pint in the pub, it makes no difference. If you go and buy a $10 bottle of wine, it will make no difference. But if you drink a carton of a cask wine, it's going to make a significant difference. Because 31 cents a standard drink is far, far, far too cheap, and some of the cheapest alcohol contributes to some of the greatest harm in our community. So we can make a difference straight away with minimum floor price, but it's also about keeping the effort on the price and the taxation policy. And it's also about decisions about hours of sale, outlet density, and so on, need to be based on quality evidence. But we also need to ensure, I'll come back to another point that'll follow on from that. Minimum legal age. The evidence is clear, compelling, consistent from Australia, from New Zealand, from the United States, where they brought the age down, then they put it back up. Increasing the minimum legal drinking age will reduce alcohol problems amongst young people. The evidence is clear and consistent. Whether it's likely to happen in a country where we have voting at 18, so I accept compulsory voting at 18, whether it's a realistic target, but at the very least, we should be enforcing the laws that we have about not serving alcohol to underage people, at the very least. And lots of people in the industry do the right thing, but those who don't should be held to account. And one illustration, as someone I know was telling me about a bottle shop where they were serving alcohol to underage young women, and I spoke to the man, and he said, well, you know what they're like, they put on makeup and they don't look 18. And I said, the fact that they're in the school uniform might be a bit of a giveaway. So let's enforce the laws we have about not serving drunk people and about not serving underage people. Support the people who, you know, again, I think Jane mentioned a level playing field. There are people in the industry who do the right thing, but they're often pushed into doing the wrong thing because their competitors are pushing the bounds. Hold them to account. And then we also need to look at the issue of private supply of alcohol. Many young people drink in private settings. Their alcohol is supplied by older siblings and older friends. And we need to address that as well. So it's not just about what happens in licensed premises, it's what happens in private settings as well. We need to address the trading hours. There's consistent evidence about that, and other people will talk more about this. But restrictions can reduce harm, and as I said, small restrictions going back from 5:30 to 3 a.m. makes a huge difference. And we need to, we've heard this evidence about tourism. Well, let's see the randomized controlled trials for the arguments. Let's have equivalence of evidence. I welcome that. Let's have equivalence of evidence. But let's not have an anecdote about tourism being used and accepted as evidence for liquor licensing. I defy you to go down to Northbridge at 3 in the morning and find many tourists. You know, if we are going to have tourism, as has been said, as an equal player at the table, then let's ensure that this equivalence of evidence is demanded. Because the equivalence, the bar is set exceptionally high for alcohol-related harm and social impact. And we shouldn't have young people exposed to alcohol promotions. And there are issues that need to happen at the federal level, but local government and state government can take a strong lead on this, and there is enormous support for this in the community. It is not acceptable in this day and age that young people are exposed to alcohol promotions. And then we need to better understand and engage with the community so that they're more informed. This is where our campaigns might go, so that they understand the role of price and what we're talking about when we're talking of price, that the role that they might have as teachers, as schools, as universities, and the importance of control on promotion. And we also need to challenge this nonsense that it's just a small minority of people who are spoiling everybody else's fun. We all need to improve the way, the respect, I guess, that we give to alcohol. And finally, I've always been of a mind that if you grab people by their performance indicators, their hearts and minds follow. So we need to do some more, and that's where I think the government can also take a lead with the agencies that it has responsibility for. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that, Steve Allsop. Now, we are getting quite a few questions coming through, so get them in nice and early. I will do my best to get through as many as I can. Steve, you went through there. You know what needs to be done. You have, for many, many years now, spoken about the kind of things, the kind of strategies that need to be put in place. And one of the questions coming through is, you know, if we know what needs to be done to reduce alcohol-related harm, why have we failed to implement much of it, and what should we do? Are the barriers, as you talked about, dealing with different levels of government, local, state and federal, industry groups, lobby groups and all those vested interests?
I think it is all of that. And is the microphone on? You can hear me? Yeah. I think it is all of that. There was somebody, I can't remember who it was, in a study in the mid-1980s, did a study in the UK looking at how many government departments had an interest in alcohol. and it was 17 or 18, and the 18th most important was health. And the rest of them were treasury, finance, industry, foreign trade, and so on. So there is one, we've got to acknowledge that political issue. The other, if I can do this, I'm going to use the royal we, and Mark Twain said the only people who are allowed to use the royal we are the King of England, the Pope, and a man with a tapeworm. So if I offend you with the royal we, you can think of me as one of those. I think we in the public health side haven't done our job. We haven't brought the community on with us. And I think we need to do that. And I think there's a number of key differences, say, with tobacco, but we don't even sing from the same hymn sheet when we provide advice to government. And I think that there needs to be a clear voice. And I think we need to be much better at bringing the community on side. And Griffith Edwards, who was someone who I had a great deal of respect for, who worked in the alcohol and drug field, said prevention should be an invitation to change. And my understanding of what he meant by that was you actually have to bring people along with you. And I think we have to invest much more about communicating. And the illustration is, I think when we talk about price, a lot of people go, oh God, no, because they think we're talking about such huge price changes that it's going to have impact, on a huge impact on them. Whereas, as I said, even small changes, and I think we have to find a way of communicating better in terms of the models that people have about what an alcohol problem is, in terms of what the effective strategies are, and sing much more clearly from the same hymn sheet as public health professionals.
If I can just pick up on that point, so where are the failures? If I can use the word failures, are we talking about the kind of campaigns, the kind of ads that we've been seeing on our TV, where it's the Saturday night, party goes crazy, people brawl, that's people's impression of binge drinking? Have we not been effective in the long-term concerns or the long-term health issues? Like where has it not been effective?
I think we haven't communicated very well. Now, I would say, and I think we also need to acknowledge good effort too. And I think West Australian government and people involved in the previous Drug and Alcohol Office and now the Mental Health Commission now have led the way in this country in terms of prevention effort on alcohol, and I think that's really important to acknowledge. And I think, a bit like not everybody was here this morning, but when Jane was talking this morning, we need to have champions and champions with support, because when you do stand up, it's a hell of an acrimonious and adversarial domain in which you stand up and speak about your concerns about alcohol. And we need leaders, and we need leaders who we support. And, one of those for me would be, we've a real opportunity here. Here's a minister who's also Deputy Premier. This is a unique opportunity, who's signalled his interest in this by having us here today. And, that is a fantastic investment and risk. But he's not just the 17th person at the table, he's also the Deputy Premier. And I think, we need to support and provide clear and support and evidence and communicate that in a way that's useful, and not have 25 different people whispering in ears saying 25 different things.
We have a question from Dr. Sudhakar Rao, well known to you all. He's obviously a trauma surgeon at Royal Perth Hospital, head of trauma unit there. He says the Royal Australian College of Surgeons supports a minimum floor price for alcohol to reduce the chronic burden of alcohol. Northern Territory is progressing this. Why not WA? Maybe that's a question better for the Health Minister.
Well, I think the Minister has indicated that, fantastic that the Northern Territory has gone down this path, and they've gone down this path because they just can't tolerate the level of burden in their communities with alcohol. Again, it's interesting that the Living with Alcohol programme in the Territory came about significantly because of Aboriginal women marching in the Northern Territory saying, we've had enough. And I think the community, giving voice to the community to say we've had enough, I think there's two other issues I want to make. One, Sudhakar, I'm assuming you're not here, you're watching, is that the Minister has flagged he's got an interest in this, and so I think it's important that he hears the various voices that are saying there's an evidence, there's a voice that's supporting you taking this action because availability matters. And the other is, whenever we speak about this, and I heard me referred to as this the other day, the anti-alcohol lobby. I drink. I used to run a bar. I'm not an anti-alcohol lobby. I want to see a massive reduction in alcohol-related harm for those who drink and for those who are affected by drinkers.
Would it set a precedent, though, having one state government go down that path? It's a pretty significant step. Do you expect that others would kind of fall into line?
I think it's a precedent, and I think it puts front and centre the importance that governments will place in the recognition that price and availability matter. And I think it's, well, Northern Territory have gained the precedent position. Well, they're a territory. So the state precedent position is still open, Minister. I think it's a precedent which is a good precedent for the rest of the country, and it also puts the pressure on the federal government to consider the importance of price in its deliberations, both as sensible tax policy and as effective public health policy.
Okay. A couple of other questions here. This one, Steve, meth and illicit drugs get lots of attention from media and politicians, more attention than alcohol. Is the attention proportionate to levels of use and harms?
Well, I never like comparing the two in that way. I think we can walk and chew gum, unlike a certain, not the current president, a previous president. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think that, you know, saying, well, alcohol, in terms of the number of problems in our community, and you'll hear a bit more about that later on, I think, yeah, the stats tell us, but if you're a mum being told that your son's only got the number 2 problem in the hit parade versus the number 1 problem, or a dad, I think that's not helpful. And at an individual level, sometimes people can have severe problems with another person can have a moderate problem with the other. So on the pure stats, the number of people who drink and the amount of harm in our community is significant. Often people who are heavily consuming one of the products are consuming others. My view is that we should not appear to minimise the harms that arise from methamphetamine. We need to do more in relation to methamphetamine, and we need to do a huge amount more in relation to alcohol. We're not even scratching the surface with alcohol. You know, one illustration, in the evidence about that 18-year-old who died recently, and there was a coroner's investigation, she had 18 drinks. And then the Polish vodka that she had at the end, that was what got blamed, you know, not the 17 drinks she'd had before. And there was, the evidence given by the ambulance services was that there was one child just about every day, it was around about 300 children transported to the hospital because of alcohol problems. That's under 18. That's obscene. That's obscene in our community. So going back to your question, we must do more in relation to methamphetamine, but we must do a great deal more in relation to alcohol.
I can raise the issue of FASD, because you haven't talked about that. There was a study out by Carol Bauer a couple of weeks ago. Now, she looked at 10 to 17-year-olds at Banksia Hill Detention Centre. She assessed 99 of those kids in there between May 2015 and December 2016. Now, 88 of those had one form of neurodevelopmental impairment. 36 had FASD. Now, that highlights certainly the vulnerability of young people, surely.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. When we had the debate in terms of the NHMRC guidelines, which they're currently being reviewed, but when we had the debate, and they first came out saying the safest option is not to drink, and the reason for that is there's mixed bits of evidence about very low levels of consumption, but where you can actually say it becomes a risk. And there was this debate going, oh, we can't cause concern because we don't have clear evidence. And I said, if this was any other drug, what would we do? And we'd have the precautionary principle. We'd say the safest option is not to drink if you're pregnant. Simple. And there was huge debate about that. I got attacked by people, and how could I be so conservative? And it's extraordinary, because nobody would debate if they had a 6-month-old baby giving them a drink. Now, it's about giving clear message, which is the safest option is not to drink, and the risk increases gradually as you drink more, and you don't have to go more than a couple of drinks to start getting into very high risk. Now, in answer to that, the main part of your question, FASD is a significant issue in our community. The costs, both currently and transgenerational, are enormous, and it's entirely preventable. Again, though, for me, if you look at the communities that have the highest rates of alcohol consumption, they're in our northwest, and those communities drink heavily, and alcohol is easily available, there's nothing else to do. The first thing you have to do is reduce alcohol availability in some of those communities. If that community drinks 3 times more than anywhere else, you're going to have higher rates of consumption, and you're going to have higher rates of FASD. So it is about availability again. And then it is also about, not Wendy, not Ali G, Mary G. Sorry. I know your name, Wendy, but yeah.
And you look nothing like Mary G.
It's about really good campaigns. It's about medical professionals who give quality advice, and many medical professionals are confused about the advice that they give. They're confused. They say, oh yeah, a few drinks are okay, and then they go to the next medical professional and they get told no, they shouldn't drink. And the same happens with alcohol. For anyone, having a few drinks is good for you. And you know, it's not medicine. It's a drug. It's a drug many of us enjoy, but don't pretend it's good for you. You can't sit on your settee and eat broccoli and drink red wine and live till you're as old as Mike Daub.
So 1 o'clock is not a good thing.
Get off your bum and go for a walk and eat less fat. And there's this notion that's sold, and it's sold by a lot of our health professionals, that alcohol is good for you. And yet, if you look at the evidence, if you look at what the World Health Organization says, it says you shouldn't drink for health benefits. Drink for conviviality, drink because you enjoy the taste, but don't pretend it's medicine.
This is a question from a liquor industry employee who also says they are a non-drinker. It's dangerous to drive at 110 kilometres per hour, but we don't ban fast cars. We punish bad individuals. Why doesn't the health lobby focus on irresponsible individuals? How would you do that?
Well, firstly, I'd contradict, I get the point that's being made, but I'd contradict what's being said there. We actually do focus on individuals, but we also ensure that their cars are safe, that the roads are safe, we educate people, we police it, we enforce the law, and we enforce the law for all. And I haven't talked about banning anything. I've talked about maybe making sure that when we have discussions about availability, we look at the health and social impacts and probably pull things back a bit in terms of the number of outlets and the hours of sale, and that we give a high profile to health. So when we deal with car safety and road safety, safe roads, safe cars, train individuals, make sure people are well informed, and if people step over the line, and that includes the people who make the cars, as well as those who drive the cars, we hold them to account. So if somebody does something that's wrong, they should be held to account. Alcohol is not an excuse for violence. Nothing is an excuse for violence. I wouldn't see it as an excuse for violence. The individual who perpetrates violence should be held to account. But I'd also question, if that person's been in a bar or a private setting where somebody else has constantly plied them with drink and then seen them out to their car, then they have some responsibility too. Of course the individual has responsibility. But the other side of it is not a philosophy debate. The practical evidence tells us that saying it's an individual's responsibility doesn't demonstrate to me any evidence that says that's going to make a difference to violence in our community. But reducing the hours of sale does. And again, reducing the hours of sale from 5:30 back to 3:30, 3 o'clock. It's not banning alcohol, it's not prohibitive.
But it's making it more difficult to access.
It reduces access, yes, for the benefit of everybody.
Here's an interesting one, if I can just find it. This question's just come through. Regarding Perth Festival and Fringe World equals mature enjoyment of alcohol. Oh, just lost it now. Could more focus on arts, culture, music and their funding promote better attitudes towards drinking?
Well, yeah, and this is the falsity of the arguments that we hear about a vibrant nighttime economy. Because if you go to Paris, the shoe shops are open till 12 o'clock, unfortunately for me. Not that I buy my shoes there, someone else I know does. I can't get in the house for them. The theatres are open. The restaurants are open. And it's a nighttime economy. But when we have debates about nighttime economy, it's about the bars being open till 3, 4, 5 in the morning, and the only people... And it's about when you come out at 11 or 12 o'clock at night, there's a diverse community on the street. There's people coming out of the restaurants, there's people coming out of the movies, there's people coming out of the Perth Festival. There's a diverse, vibrant community on the street. But when you come out at 5 in the morning, the only people on the street are pissed people like you trying to get a taxi with a kebab in their hand. Now, sorry to stereotype it like that, but it's not a nighttime economy. It's about more alcohol. So if we're serious about a nighttime economy, open the restaurants longer, open the theatres, open the museums, and have a diverse nighttime economy. But don't pretend it's a diverse nighttime economy when it's all about booze. And when you go to Europe, they have brilliant public transport systems that get people home. They also, in Scotland, I just used to open the windows and they'd all go home. And that was in the summer. We have a benign climate, so people hang around, can't get home. We don't get them home safely. We have drink driving laws that many people abide by, but then they can't get a taxi home, and then there's other people who are intoxicated bumping into them. So if we point to other examples around the world, and by the way, Los Angeles, which is not known for being a quiet, suburban, quiet place, they close at 2. And so let's not pretend it's about something when it's not. Opening longer, having more bars, won't turn us into Paris. What we need is a diverse, vibrant nighttime economy, which is a diverse economic, and which has people planning how we get people home safely, and closes at a time when we know the evidence tells us it's probably a time when we can significantly reduce violence that affects all of us.
It isn't what you're saying different to the government's point of view, because they talk a lot about the European drinking culture that it wants to adopt here, and we have a couple of questions regarding that, and what is the role of tourism in liquor licensing, because what you're talking about there, Steve, does tap into this European culture that the government wants.
Well, again, in my presentation, I said that there's a myth about the European culture. They have very high rates of drinking, and they have very high rates of liver disease and acquired brain injury from alcohol. And in fact, France has brought in enormous controls on the availability and the promotion of alcohol because they were so concerned. Now, it's actually come down by a massive amount, but it's still I think it's 2.5 times higher than our rates of alcoholic cirrhosis. So don't pretend that Europe is a model. And the unfortunate thing is, I'm all for small bars, I'm all for tourism, but what happens is it gets added to the overall, and then it becomes more outlets and longer hours. So I think we shouldn't pretend that the European experience is, and in Paris I think they close at 2, but you can get an extension to 4, but you're then heavily policed, and if you have one breach, you lose your license for that extension. So again, you can't take one little bit of it out and say the rest of it will work here. So, and the other thing I think, and I had it in my slide, but I forgot to mention, I do strongly recommend this. We've seen the arguments about reducing red tape. Well, if we're serious about reducing red tape, reduce red tape for the community, because it is an adversarial, hard experience for the community to voice their concerns about what we do about alcohol. And you go in raising concerns and you're faced by a top silk who's being paid top dollar to argue your case down. So if we want to reduce red tape for the industry, well, reduce red tape for the community as well to have their voice heard, help develop the capacity of the community to have their voice heard. And as I said, if we're going to have arguments about tourism being at the same table as public health, then let's ask for the same quality of evidence in the decision making.
And should they have a role in liquor licensing issues too then?
Well, it depends on, I mean, I think they have a voice, but it shouldn't be the predominant voice. And I think the predominant voice is the evidence, and well, the community and the evidence.
This question, we know from evidence direct intervention works. Why doesn't WA have a banned drinkers register and restrict access for criminal offenders? That would be pretty hard to police, I would imagine. You
can ask the Minister that. But again, the evidence about these sorts of strategies is it's very much focused on an individual. I've seen some examples of it. I've observed examples of it where I thought, well, that looks quite good. But in terms of impact across the whole population, the impact is very small. And again, it's the focus on the individual. It's saying you're solely responsible. A lot of people drink in private settings, so if we reduce the massive difference between off-sale and on-sale prices, that is a key issue for me, which is why minimum floor price is something that's really important to consider. Again, it's going back to not what we think might work, but what does the evidence tell us work, and what has the greatest impact for the lowest cost across the whole community. And it's not about singling out a few people who are doing the wrong thing. And I think you do have to have strategies to refuse people who are intoxicated and to be able to remove them from premises. But we also need to recognise that a lot of drinking is done in private settings, and we need strategies that address that too. And again, one of the key issues we haven't touched on, I guess, is sort of preloading. It's not new. People talk about it as a new phenomenon. I did it with really horrible 50-cent a bottle of wine. But the difference now is I used to do it for half an hour, and now people do it for 7 hours before they go out, and then they go out intoxicated. I wouldn't want to be running a hotel in that context. It's an enormous price difference between what you can buy and take away and drink large quantities of, and then go into a nightclub or a hotel. So again, for me, that's one of the important aspects of why a minimum floor price could make a significant difference in our community.
All right, we will leave it there. Time is getting away from us. Thank you very much, Professor Steve Allsop. Thank you.